Hello and welcome back. My name is Kevin Spila from the CPA Education Foundation, and I'll be your host for this episode of Straight from the CPA's Mouth. Have you looked at a business and said, man, I wish I'd thought of that. How did they get started? Or had someone say to you, you're really good at that. You should start a business. And you think, nah, it's just a hobby. Well, believe it or not, but you can turn your hobby or your passion into a business. Sometimes you just need the planets to align, and you need to be open to the opportunity when it comes your way. That, in a nutshell, is how our guest started his brewing business. Joining me today from Calgary, Alberta, through the magic of Zoom, is Conrad Ferrel CPA, CA, founder and CEO of True Büch Kombucha. We're going to talk about his experience and motivation behind starting True Büch with his wife Louisa, and the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on not only their business, but the charities they support. So let's hear it straight from the CPA's mouth.
I heard that futurecasting is an essential tool for long-term business
According to a recent poll, 48% of Canadians say they are $200 or less each month away from financial
Market is down again. Do you think the energy sector is
of Albertans say the economy is too dependent on oil.
Canadian student leaves university with $26,000? I'm considering cloud computing for my business.
Filter out the noise. Hear it straight from the CPA's mouth.
Hello again, and welcome to Straight from the CPA's Mouth, and welcome Conrad. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Great. So I guess we'll just start with the basics. Question about kombucha. It's been around for a long time, and it's been popular in European countries for decades, but it is relatively new to Canada. For our listeners who may not know, could you explain what kombucha is and what the health benefits are?
Sure. In a general nutshell, kombucha is a fermented tea. It dates back to the Chinese dynasty back thousands of years ago, where that culture at that time was making their fermented drink of their choice, and that was kombucha. So every culture throughout history of time kind of has their own fermented food that help with preservation and also help with gut flora and just gave general health benefits. And so the example would be sauerkraut, yogurt, those types of products. Kombucha is in kind of the same category. However, it's a beverage. It's a naturally effervescent, delicious beverage that is low in sugar and great in high in amino acids, probiotics, vitamin B12. It's just a great alternative to soda, and it tastes delicious as well.
Okay. So how did you first get interested in kombucha, and why did you start brewing it?
Well, since this is a CPA podcast, it was all connected to me writing and studying for the UFI, which now it's called something else. I believe I can't remember the name of the new exam, but the UFI was the CA exam at the time,
Right?
And it's a 3-day exam. Obviously, everybody knows that. And so I was trying to figure out a way to hone into my focus. And what happened was I was diving into health benefits and gut flora and how the gut and the brain interact. And so the better your gut is, the better your brain and focus is. And so that got me down the path of finding ways to get probiotics and my gut flora as healthy as it could be to write the CA exam. I have a lot of allergies and a lot of health issues. So that was just an add-on that just was something that I wanted to do personally. And it obviously was a benefit to writing the exam.
Okay. What motivated you to turn that into a business? Were you always an aspiring entrepreneur, or?
Yeah, so I did my CPA as a way to get a crash course, or not really a crash course, an extended crash course, I guess, in business and business acumen. And my father is a CA as well.
Okay.
So he's an entrepreneur. So I kind of learned from his ropes and I saw the benefit from it. I always knew I was going to run and own my own business in some form or fashion. Didn't expect it to be in the food CPG category, beverage category, but here we are. And the way it kind of started was I was brewing this kombucha post the exam and post CA exam, and I was brewing it for years and years in my home and using it as an alternative to beer because I stopped drinking beer. And so I was bringing it to parties, and friends and family were like, why don't you sell this commercially? And so the stars kind of aligned when the company I was with, we sold that company. I was a CFO of a company. We sold it, and I had some time and some free capital to try something new. So that's where I am today.
Okay. So the planets really did align for you.
They did. The timing was good. It was the beginning of kind of the kombucha migration from California was really the birthplace of it, from making it a commercial product.
Right.
You know, it was homebrewed from, let's call it the hippie world was homebrewing it for many, many decades. And then it kind of made it into a commercial realm out of California through GT Dave, who is the pioneer of kombucha 15 years ago, commercially.
One of the things that I found interesting when looking at your website, both inspiring and interesting actually, is that right from the beginning, you had made it your mission to not just build a business, but to give back to the community. Can you talk a little bit about why that was so important? What kinds of organizations or projects you guys support?
Yeah, so when my wife and I came up with the idea to do True Büch and what we wanted to do as a business, we wanted to originally have it as a purely as a social enterprise. Then we realized that was going to be very difficult. So it needs to have a social enterprise aspect to it. And so we decided to always from day one to contribute about 10% of our profits to local charities that are dear to our hearts. And the reason we did that is basically, you know, like brands start in their hometown, right? And they kind of migrate and they kind of grow and expand nationally. And really your true fans, hashtag true fans with True Büch, is that they're the ones that created you. Like we started off in a farmer's market and we had these fans that would come in and they would tell their friends, and it just kind of snowballed that way, right? It's all word of mouth. We did zero marketing. We had zero advertising budget.
Really?
It was all word of mouth. So what we did was we said, well, these are the people that are supporting us. We need to go back into that community and support them as well. And it's kind of a circle of support, right? That Calgary and Calgary small businesses need to work together. And so what we did was we looked at things like Meal Share, right? Meal Share gives meals to, they team up with restaurants and organizations to give meals to the underprivileged, right? We have Genesis Basketball that we support, that's underprivileged kids to support them to play basketball and sports in general, right? One of my favorites is ARCS, which is the shelter for dogs and animals. Every year we support a dog in need that maybe needs a massive surgery. So we send a few $1,000s there every year for one specific dog to fix whatever problem's going on so they can live their life and maybe end up in a home that, you know, that family is going to love them and there'll be unconditional love forever, right? So it's kind of, True Büch is kind of designed around the premise of giving back to the community because it's what supported us.
Okay, that's great. And you guys have been in business since about 2014, right?
Correct, yeah.
And you've been quite successful, and including receiving multiple Made in Alberta awards. I think that was just this past year, if I'm not mistaken. So obviously the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact, but prior to that, what do you think has been your biggest challenge to date?
Biggest challenge is trying to understand an industry you know nothing about.
Right.
I didn't come from the CPG world. I didn't come from the grocery world. I worked as a bag clerk at Safeway when I was 16 years old. But beyond that, I didn't understand the ins and the outs of everything from what it takes to get onto the big grocery store shelves, what it costs, the margins, who has their hands out for different aspects of distribution costs. There's a lot of lingo. There's a lot of old school systems, let's call it, where it's a lot to navigate. It's a big space, right? Like there's so many, like the thousands and thousands of CPG products on the shelves at any grocery store. Everybody's competing for that space, and kombucha is getting even more competition as the days go on because of its popularity. And so just navigating that world and different aspects of it in manufacturing, like, right? I didn't come from a manufacturing background either. So it went from, you know, we do everything in-house, where a lot of consumer packaged goods hire it out to a third party to make it. They come up with a formula, but then they send it to a third party to make. We do it all in-house, right? So everything is here and made, and we're fully integrated, and we're just trying to navigate this space that we learned 6 years ago and still learning every day. It's pretty humbling.
Right. So what do you think are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from starting a company based on a product that nobody basically knew about here in Canada?
The lessons I learned was to don't sell yourself short. I always was hesitant to grow faster than maybe I could have or should have in hindsight, but everything's hindsight, right? And so we grew from day one. We were profitable and we were cash flow positive, and that isn't normally the case for any company, let alone a consumer packaged good company, right? And we did that very grassroots, very bootstrapped. We took every dollar that was made and reinvested it, and never took any investor money, and never took any debt until we needed to, about 3 or 4 years in. And so in hindsight, that's maybe not the way, you're taught in business 101, is to, find some good cheap money, find some debt, rely on friends and family. But I never wanted to do that. I wanted to grow a business on its own merit and its own success, versus it just having a bunch of cash in the bank and us burning it. Because if there's money in the bank, you're going to use it, right? So we kind of ran on a very shoestring budget. But in hindsight, if I had done things maybe on that business 101 where I raised a few dollars, we could have grabbed more of the market share, because it was such a fast paced at the beginning where there wasn't very many players. Like the example would have been, the writing was on the wall when I was turning away customers because I couldn't produce enough, right?
Okay.
Maybe that was the time that I should have invested or found some investment and grew 10 times the size we are. But that isn't my personality, so I don't have any regrets. But that's something I learned for maybe the next business venture I go into.
Okay, interesting. Just going back to the pandemic for a second, how has COVID-19 affected your operations, and what have you had to do differently?
When we originally started the company, Louisa and I, we started off strictly in draft, meaning that you have a draft station and a draft tap, no different than draft beer, right?
Right.
And we have growlers, and so we had this whole kind of environmental side of things where we wanted to be zero waste, and we wanted to have these growlers, being reused and refilled all over with our growler stations scattered across Alberta. And with the COVID-19, Alberta Health Services decided to shut that all down. And so that was, at this time, was 40% of our revenue, because that's how we originally started it. And the draft program is very successful, and people love to have that environmental, knowing that they're doing something environmentally friendly, where they're not just buying a single-use bottle.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're buying a growler and reusing it. So we lost 40% of our revenues that way. And so what we did was we really transitioned quickly and put our growlers, our refill growlers, online. And we put our cases online as well for Calgary and Calgary area residents. And so we've been busy. We got a driver going out 6 or 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, dropping off to our true fans, right? That weren't able to get their growlers refilled somewhere else, and because the refill stations are shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't wanting to go to the grocery stores because of the pandemic, obviously, right? They wanted home delivery. So we transitioned within, I think, from thought to website and store open was about 5 days.
Right.
And we had all, at the beginning of the first couple months of it, was crazy. We had about 5 drivers out every day doing just crazy amounts of hours in delivery. So it was humbling. We thought we might get 5 orders, and we got 500 in the first week type thing, right? So
wow.
It was very humbling to see how much Calgary loves you, and how much, our community involvement kind of came full circle to support us, and vice versa, right? And that's kind of where True Büch loves to see that, is that, we're in the community. The Calgarians love us. This is where we're born and raised. I'm born and raised in Calgary. And so it was humbling to see that support, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's definitely come full circle that way, huh? Do you guys just deliver in Calgary? Do you operate outside of the Calgary area, or just locally for now?
We're a national brand,
focused
mainly on Western Canada, all the way from the coast, Vancouver coast or Victoria coast, all the way to the prairies. We're a little bit in Ontario, but from a home delivery standpoint, we personally deliver in Calgary, like our True Büch van and our distribution. But through our partners with Spud and Save on Foods, you can order on their websites for home delivery as well.
Okay.
In Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton.
Okay. You mentioned that the community came back and supported you during this time. So how has the pandemic affected how you can assist the community further?
The pandemic's been interesting, right? Like, there's a lot of businesses that aren't doing well, right? So when they're not doing well, they're not going to continue to support charities as well, right? And so we had to dial that back a bit, because we had a business to run, and I know the charities do too. And I feel real bad for charities across the board, not even just the ones we support,
absolutely,
but in general, that have lost that extra cash flow to support their initiatives. And I mean, when things come back and the cash flow is back and we're back in the green versus the red, we obviously will go back to support those. And we still do. We still support our initiatives just in a lower dollar value, just because it is what it is. Everybody's kind of in dire straits sometimes, more so than others. But we've been very fortunate. We knock on wood every day that we still have operations, we still have sales, we still have people buying our product. Not as much as before, but hopefully that all ends and we can start supporting our community even more than we used to before, and getting back to that. And I think that's what the pandemic has shown to Calgarians, to Canadians, to the world, that you need to really focus on your local community first.
Right.
You need to ignore the Amazons of the world and shop local. You need to do these things to keep the dollars in your community, because as soon as the dollars aren't there, they go somewhere else. That means there's less employment, there's less opportunities for the people in your community, right? And that's just something we're trying to do, is really stay local, buy local, and in turn, hope that Calgarians do the same for us.
Right. That makes sense. Just circling back then to today's theme, are there any ways a person can tell if they should pursue transforming their hobbies into a career?
I mean, it's a big jump, and
right.
and if I'd known what the struggles were going to be like we're in 6 years. The first 6 years, I would have, if I'd known already, and how that would have, if the feelings that it portrayed, and a lot of sleepless nights and anxiety and the stress and all that kind of things, I say that I probably wouldn't have done it, but that would be a lie, because I don't know what else I would have done. So
right.
I'm the kind of personality that I would have done it no matter how bad I know it is. So you just need to do a gut check. Not everybody is designed to be an entrepreneur, and that's a reality, and that's coming from somebody that was very naive to know what being a business owner and a business runner is. There's a lot of challenges, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of risk, right? And you have to do a gut check to do that. Now, that's on the personal side of things. Now, on the product side of things, you need to do the testing, as test with friends and family, do Google AdWords, test it, make an online store, sell it on Etsy, whatever your product or service is. Before you jump in, just do a little trial. I mean, my trial was, bringing it to parties and events and gatherings, and people trying it and getting feedback. And I spent 5-6 years playing with my formula before it became a commercial success, right?
Right.
And I had the luxury of doing that. I had a job, I had things I could do. And I think people just need to sit back and say, it's not as easy as it looks, but it's also not as hard as it looks. So if you're focused and really want to be an entrepreneur, then be an entrepreneur. If you're thinking about only the dollars and that you're going to make millions of dollars, that's the wrong approach. You need to kind of look at it from is this the lifestyle and the personal reward I get from the hard work going into it, and seeing something from infancy to success? Is that something I'm going to want to work very hard and sleepless nights and 12-hour days at?
Right.
And if that's something you want to do, then by all means, jump 2 feet in and do it, because you will be very successful. If you're on the fence, you kind of have to get a gut check and figure out how much energy and time you want to put into something and where your risk profile sits.
Right. Okay. Speaking of risk, like many people are afraid of trying to monetize their personal interest because of the risk of failure. What advice would you have for them?
Failure is inevitable. Basically it. If you don't fail, then you're doing something wrong. And I learned that the hard way. I've had a lot of failures in this last 12 years of my life, but a lot of them happened in the last 6 years with True Büch in different forms or fashion. And the failures is where you learn and where you grow. And the fear of failure is what prevents people from doing things. And I think that's the wrong approach. I think the failure is what you want to achieve.
Okay.
And because that's your only learning tool. It sounds kind of backwards, but it's something that took me 12 years to figure out. And I finally kind of embraced failure as a positive versus a negative.
Okay. So it's all in how you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, you mentioned off the top that this was a CPA podcast, so I have a CPA question for you. How does having a CPA designation help you get a leg up on turning your personal interest into a successful business venture?
As I said, we've always been cash flow positive and profitable from day one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have a lot of that to attribute to the CPA program, in all honesty. Like when I came from KPMG and I was in the enterprise division, which was the small business side of things, I saw a lot of small businesses. I was there for 7 years. I was a manager. I saw a lot of clients that had their struggles, had their successes, and I saw the things that worked and the things that didn't. And what it all boiled down to is people not focusing on profit and only focusing on sales and only focusing on, raising the money, but not doing the things to make that money work for them and those kind of things, right? And so when I sat back, I said, from day one, I want to be able to present this company in a way that is always for sale, if that makes sense. So it is always going to be profitable. So how do I do that? Well, I need to always be within lean, but also strategic in that form or fashion. And being a CA is definitely, or a CPA is definitely what helped me understand that dynamic and that big picture stuff of how a business from its P&L, from its cash flow, from its balance sheet works to be profitable from day one. I mean, we had the benefit of there was high demand for our product. We weren't creating something from scratch that hadn't been tested in the market yet. There's already players. I was just one of the first Canadian players, let's call it, to come to market. So I had that advantage, and maybe it wouldn't have been the same outcome from day one if I had a different product. But that's my mentality. And if you go with that mentality that, profits first, cash flow first, making sure that you have a strong balance sheet and you understand the numbers, your business will more likely than not be successful than be a failure.
Okay.
And I think that's what the CPA program really teaches you in a broad spectrum, right?
Okay. That sounds great. So we are nearing the end of our time. Just one final question then. What's next for True Büch?
The pandemic kind of put a hold on a few things. We had national expansion aspirations to compete with the top 2 Canadian brands in Canada. Unfortunately, what happened was with the pandemic is a product like kombucha, it has to get into people's mouths to understand it. Only about 10% of the population actually know what it is. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like beer, it's not like pop, it's not like chips. You have to explain what it is, and you also have to have the customer taste it. And with the pandemic, all sampling, all in-store, at grocery stores, samplings have all been shut down. There's no way for us to have that touch point with customers and with our potential distributors and buyers as well. Like everything's over Zoom, but you can't really have those conversations and those touch points unless you're shipping kombucha across the country, right? Having them sample it, but you can't sit in the same room with them and have a discussion and talk about flavor profiles. So what happened in the grocery world is a lot of grocery guys they just put a hold on any new product entries into their business, right? Okay. Because of the pandemic, they had other bigger fish to fry. And that's been the common theme for the last year and a half. We're hoping that once this kind of pandemic ends, that we can penetrate the Ontario market, the East Coast, get bigger and deeper into the BC market. Okay. We're very dominant in Alberta, but we want to kind of penetrate those different markets that we now have the capacity to do. We just moved into in December 2019, about 3 months before the pandemic, we moved into a brand new 10,000 square foot, beautiful facility that we can do about 20x our production right now. Right. And so we want to utilize that space. We want to do national expansion. We want to get into different product lines. So there's a lot of things in the hopper. It's just a matter of once the pandemic ends and how that looks and how purchasers and buyers decide to look at True Büch, and hopefully they put them on the shelf. Right. So there's a lot of hurry up and wait. Yeah, hurry up and wait. And we're just kind of in a holding period, and we're pretty blessed and humbled that we have a business that still can keep everybody employed and keep everybody happy and still churn. Mm-hmm. It's just we want to get bigger and better aspirations as a company for the next 5 to 10 years for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And good luck to you with that. I hope things turn out well for you. Thank you, Conrad, for joining me and sharing your story. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Straight from the CPA's Mouth. This episode featured Conrad Ferrel CPA CA, founder and CEO of True Büch Kombucha. Don't forget to subscribe to the Straight from the CPA's Mouth mailing list, and if you like what you're hearing, have ideas for future episodes, or have any feedback you'd like to share, email us at knowledgecenter@cpaalberta.ca or leave us a comment on social media. And finally, if you're interested in learning more about the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center, you can learn more at cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.
Straight from the CPA's Mouth is brought to you by the CPA Education Foundation. The CPA Education Foundation is the charitable arm of the Alberta CPA profession, providing up to $1.2 million each year in support of business and accounting education in the province. This podcast is just one of many resource materials available through the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center. This virtual hub features Alberta CPAs sharing their unique perspective and vast expertise on topics and issues such as leadership, finance, entrepreneurship, and more. Visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation for more information on the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center and to learn how Alberta CPAs inspire success.